I found the letter tucked inside my grandmother's old recipe book. The one with the cracked spine and flour stains that never quite washed out. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September. The kind of day when the air smells like rain that hasn't fallen yet. And I'd been packing up her kitchen after the funeral. Everyone else had already gone through the house, taking what they wanted. The jewelry, the antique clock, the good china. They left me with the kitchen stuff because, as my sister Ashley put it, "You're the one who actually cooks anyway, Maggie." The letter was addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting, shaky but deliberate, dated just 3 weeks before she passed. To my Maggie, it read. The one who stayed when everyone else was too busy to visit. The one who listened to my stories even when I repeated them. I have something to tell you, something I should have said years ago, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me differently. Afraid you'd stop loving the woman you thought you knew. My hand started trembling as I unfolded the yellowed pages. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street, and I could hear my husband Jake loading boxes into his truck. Completely unaware that the next few minutes would crack open everything. I thought I understood about my family, about myself. About the choices women make when the world gives them impossible options. I wasn't always the grandmother you knew, she wrote. Before I was Nana. Before I baked cookies and sang lullabies, I was Margaret Ann Sullivan. And I killed a man. The words hit me like cold water. I read them again, certain I'd misunderstood. But there they were, stark and unapologetic on the page. I sat down hard on one of her kitchen chairs. The one with the wobbly leg that she'd always meant to fix but never did. The letter continued. It was 1967. I was 23 years old, married to your grandfather for 2 years, and pregnant with your mother. We lived in a small apartment in Chicago, the kind where you could hear every argument through paper, thin walls. Charles, your grandfather, he wasn't the man you remember. The one who told jokes at Christmas dinner and taught you to play chess. Back then, he was different, angry. The kind of angry that lives in your bones and comes out through your fists when the rent is late or isn't ready, or you look at him wrong on a Tuesday. I felt sick. My grandfather. The man who used to carry me on his shoulders through the park. The one who cried at my wedding. I wanted to stop reading. To fold the letter back up and pretend I'd never found it. But something kept my eyes moving down the page. Some terrible need to know the truth even if it hurt. The first time he hit me, I was 4 months pregnant. I'd burned the pot roast. Such a small thing. He backhanded me across the kitchen, and I fell against the counter. I told myself it was my fault. That's what women did back then. We made excuses, we said things like, "He's under a lot of stress," or "I should have been more careful." The truth is, I was terrified. My mother had warned me before I married him. She saw something in his eyes that I was too young and too in love to recognize. But I didn't listen. I thought I knew better. My phone buzzed. A text from Ashley asking if I wanted any of Nana's old photo albums. I ignored it. The world outside this letter had become background noise, distant and unimportant. It got worse after your mother was born. Charles couldn't hold down a job. He'd come home late smelling like whiskey and cigarettes. And if the baby was crying, or if I looked too tired, or if the apartment wasn't perfect, he'd find a reason. One night, when your mother was 6 months old, he came home in one of his moods. I'd left dishes in the sink because the baby had been colicky all day. He grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the wall. Your mother was in her bassinet, screaming. I couldn't breathe. I saw stars. And in that moment, I realized if he didn't stop, he was going to kill me. Maybe not that night. But eventually. And then what would happen to my baby? I wiped my eyes, not even realizing I'd started crying. Jake called out asking if I needed help with anything. And I managed to croak out that I was fine. But I wasn't fine. Nothing. The man I killed wasn't Charles, Maggie. I want you to understand that. His name was Frank Morrison. He lived in the apartment below us, and he was worse than Charles ever was. I'd heard his wife screaming through the floor for months. One night, I heard something heavier than screaming, a body hitting the floor. A woman crying in a way that sounds like dying. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the kitchen knife. The one I used to cut vegetables, and I went downstairs. The door was unlocked. She was on the floor, bleeding from her mouth, her eyes swollen shut. He was standing over her with his belt in his hand. And something in me just snapped. The paper crinkled in my grip. I realized I was holding it so tight my knuckles had gone white. I didn't think, I just moved. I buried that knife in his back before he even knew I was there. He turned around, surprised, and then he fell. Just like that. One moment he was a monster, and the next he was a body on the floor. His wife, her name was Dorothy, she just stared at me. Then she got up, grabbed her coat, and left. She never said a word. Never came back. The police found Frank 3 days later when the smell started. They ruled it a robbery gone wrong. No one ever suspected me. Not the police. Not even Dorothy, wherever she went. My grandmother had killed someone. The woman who taught me to make apple pie. And told me I was beautiful even when I felt invisible. She had taken a life. And she'd carried that secret for over 50 years. I know what you're thinking, Maggie. You're thinking I'm a murderer. Maybe I am. But here's what I learned that night. Sometimes the world doesn't give us good choices and bad choices. Sometimes it gives us impossible choices and slightly less impossible choices. I chose to stop a woman from being beaten to death. I chose to use violence to end violence. And I've lived with choice every single day since. The letter went on for pages. She told me how she eventually left Charles 3 years later. How she took my mother and moved across the country. How she changed her name and started over. How Charles died in a car accident in 1975, drunk behind the wheel, and how she didn't cry at his funeral. How she met the man I knew as my grandfather, Robert, her second husband, who was kind and gentle and everything Charles wasn't. Robert never knew about Frank. He never knew about Charles. I gave him the version of me that I wished I'd always been. Calm, happy, whole. And maybe that's my real crime, Maggie. Not killing Frank, but pretending to be someone I wasn't for 40 years. Robert deserved the truth. But I was so afraid of losing him. So afraid of losing everyone. The last page was different, her handwriting smaller, more urgent. I'm telling you this now because I see something in you, sweetheart. I see the same thing I saw in myself when I was young. That quiet strength that people mistake for weakness. That ability to carry pain without showing it. I've watched you with your husband, with your children. With your job that demands everything and gives back so little. I see how you shrink yourself to make room for everyone else. How you apologize for taking up space. How you smile when you want to scream. My breath caught. How had she known? I'd never told her about the nights I cried in the bathroom after Jake criticized my cooking. About how I'd given up my dream of going to law school. Because he said we couldn't afford it, even though we could afford his new truck. About how I felt invisible in my own life. Like a background character in someone else's story. I'm not telling you to kill anyone, Maggie. The letter continued. I'm telling you that you have permission to fight. To take up space. To be loud and messy and imperfect. To choose yourself, even when it feels selfish. Especially when it feels selfish. Because here's what I learned too late. The people who love you will love you louder. And the people who don't. They were never really there in the first place. She ended the letter with a confession that made my heart stop. The recipe book you're holding. Look inside the back cover. I've left you something. With shaking hands, I turned to the back of the book. Taped inside was an envelope, thick with something. I opened it carefully. Inside were 20 crisp $100 bills, $2,000, and a smaller note. This is for you. Not for Jake, not for the Jake. Not for bills or groceries or anyone else's emergency. This is for Maggie. The Maggie who wanted to be a lawyer. The Maggie who loves to paint but hasn't picked up a brush in 5 years. The Maggie who deserves to dream again. Use it to start over, or use it to stay. But make sure it's your choice. All my love, Nana. I sat in that kitchen for an hour, maybe more. The afternoon light shifted, turning everything gold and amber. Outside, Jake finished loading the truck and came looking for me. You okay in here? He asked from the doorway. I looked up at him. Really looked at him for the first time in months. Saw the way he stood like he owned every room he entered. The way he looked at his watch, already impatient to leave. The way he didn't ask what I was reading, didn't notice the tears on my face. Yeah, I said slowly. I think I am. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dorothy. The woman my grandmother had saved. Where had she gone? Had she started over? Had she been happy? And I thought about my grandmother. Carrying the weight of that choice for decades, wondering if anyone would understand. By morning, I'd made my decision. I didn't leave Jake that day or even that week. But I did something I hadn't done in years. I enrolled in community college, just one class to start. Constitutional law. I used my grandmother's money for tuition and books. When Jake asked where I got the money, I said, "Nana left it to me." He frowned. "We should use that for the credit cards." "No," I said. And the word felt like power in my mouth. "This is mine." He argued, of course he argued. But something had shifted in me. That letter had cracked open a door I didn't even know was there. For the first time, I could see a path forward that didn't require me to disappear. The class was harder than I expected. I was older than most of the students, rusty at studying, terrified of failing. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about my grandmother sitting in that Chicago apartment, making an impossible choice. If she could do that, I could do this. 3 months into the semester, Jake and I had our first real fight. He'd gone through my things and found my textbooks. "You're embarrassing me," he said. "People are asking why my wife needs to go back to school. Like I can't provide." "This isn't about you," I told him. "Everything you do reflects on me." He shot back. And there it was. The thing I'd been too afraid to see for years. In Jake's mind I wasn't a person. I was a reflection, an extension, a supporting character in his story. "I want a divorce," I said. The words surprised both of us. They certainly surprised me. I hadn't planned to say them. But once they were out, hanging in the air between us, I realized they were true. They'd been true for a long time. Jake laughed, that mean laugh he did when he thought I was being ridiculous. "You can't afford a divorce." "Maybe not," I said. "But I can't afford to stay either." He left that night, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. I stood in the quiet house, heart pounding, terrified and exhilarated all at once. The divorce took 18 months. It was ugly and expensive, and there were days I wanted to give up, to go back, to make myself small again if it meant things could just be easy. But every time I wavered, I reread my grandmother's letter. "You have permission to fight." So I fought. I finished that first class with a B+. Then I took another. And I got a part-time job at a law firm, just answering phones and filing papers, but I absorbed everything. I asked questions. I learned. My kids were confused at first. My daughter Emma, who was 16, asked me why I was ruining everything. "Dad says you're having a midlife crisis." "Maybe I am," I told her. "Or maybe I'm finally having a life." She didn't understand then, but years later, when she was in college and called me crying about a boyfriend who made her feel small, she said, "I get it now, Mom. What you did. Why you had to." My son Tyler was younger, only 12 when I left. He was angry for a long time. But I kept showing up, kept being present, kept proving that choosing myself didn't mean abandoning him. The law firm where I worked offered to pay for the rest of my education if I agreed to work for them after I passed the bar. I said yes before they could change their minds. It took me 6 years. 6 years of classes and studying and working and being a single mom and barely sleeping and wanting to quit approximately 1,000 times. But I did it. I passed the bar exam on my second try. The day I got my results, I drove to my grandmother's grave. I hadn't been since the funeral. The headstone was simple. Margaret Ann Sullivan Hartman. Beloved mother, grandmother, friend. I sat on the grass and cried. Not sad tears this time, grateful ones. "I did it, Nana," I whispered. I fought. I like to think she heard me. That wherever she is, she knows her letter changed everything. That her impossible choice, all those years ago, somehow gave me permission to make my own. Now, when my daughter asks me for advice, when she's struggling with a decision or feeling stuck, I tell her what my grandmother told me. The people who love you will love you louder. And the people who don't, they were never really there in the first place. I think about Dorothy sometimes, the woman whose life my grandmother saved. I wonder if she ever knew what happened to the young mother who killed her husband. If she ever thought about going back to thank her. I like to imagine she didn't need to. That she took that second chance and ran with it. That she built a life on the other side of her pain. Because that's what we do, isn't it? Those of us who survive the impossible. We take the broken pieces and we build something new. We carry our scars like armor. We tell our story so other women know they're not alone. Last year, I represented my first domestic violence case. A woman named Sarah, 34 years old, mother of 2, married to a man who hurt her when he drank, which was most nights. She sat across from me in my office, one eye purple, her hands shaking as she signed a restraining order paperwork. "I feel like I'm betraying him," she said softly. "Like I'm giving up on my marriage." I reached across the desk and took her hand. "You're not giving up," I told her. "You're choosing yourself, and that's not betrayal. That's survival." She cried then, big heaving sobs that shook her whole body. And I let her. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself feel it. All of it. The fear and the grief and the guilt, and the relief all tangled up together. After she left, I pulled out my grandmother's letter. I keep it in my desk drawer now. The paper soft and worn from being folded and unfolded so many times. I read it whenever I need courage, whenever I'm representing someone like Sarah, whenever I doubt whether any of this matters. It matters. God, it matters. Every woman I help leave. Every restraining order I file. Every custody agreement I negotiate. Every divorce I push through over the protests of men who think they own their wives. It all matters. My grandmother killed a man to save a woman she didn't even know. And maybe that was wrong. Maybe there should have been another way. But in that moment at apartment in Chicago in 1967, she made a choice. She decided one woman's life was worth fighting for. And now I make that same choice every day. Not with violence, not with knives and blood and secrets. But with paperwork and courtrooms and late nights preparing cases. With restraining orders and divorce decrees and custody arrangements. With phone calls at 3 in the morning when a client is scared and needs to hear a voice that believes her. I'm not a hero. I want to make that clear. I make mistakes. I lose cases. I get tired and cranky, and sometimes I eat cereal for dinner because I'm too exhausted to cook. I'm not perfect. I'm not even particularly brave most days. But I'm here, and I'm fighting. And that has to count for something. Emma is in law school now. She says she wants to do what I do. To help women like I helped her see that she didn't have to shrink herself to be loved. Tyler is studying social work. He wants to work with at-risk youth. Both of them understand now why I had to leave. Why I couldn't stay small. Why I chose the hard path instead of the easy one. Sometimes late at night. When the house is quiet and I'm the only one awake. I think about all the versions of myself that died so this version could live. The girl who married too young. The woman who apologized for existing. The mother who thought sacrifice meant disappearance. I don't mourn those versions, they were necessary. They taught me what I didn't want to be. But I do thank them. For surviving long enough to become me. Last month, I got a letter. It came to my office. Addressed simply to the lawyer who helped Sarah. Inside was a short note and a photo. The note read, "You saved my life. I start nursing school next month. My daughters and I are safe and happy. Thank you for believing me when no one else did." The photo showed Sarah and her girls, all three of them smiling on a beach somewhere. The ocean sparkling behind them. Free. I pinned that photo to my bulletin board, right next to my law degree and my grandmother's letter. 3 generations of women. All fighting in our own ways. All refusing to disappear. And if you're listening to this, if you're in a situation where you feel stuck or scared or invisible, I want you to know something: you are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to fight. You are allowed to take up space in this world. The people who love you will love you louder. And the people who don't, they were never really there in the first place. My grandmother taught me that. She taught me that sometimes survival looks like violence. And sometimes it looks like leaving. And sometimes it looks like staying exactly where you are but refusing to be small anymore. There is no one right way to fight. There's just your way. And whatever that looks like for you, I promise you, it's enough. I found a letter in a recipe book, and it changed my life. Maybe this story will be someone else's letter. Maybe someone out there needs to hear that they're not crazy. They're not weak, they're not failing. Maybe they just need permission. So here it is, permission granted. Now,